the complex, the nuclear weapons complex, and something landed. And so I conducted that investigation, which was extensive investigation, which led into the Paul Benowitz incident.
What was that all about? What actually happened with that?
Paul Benowitz or the...
Well, both.
Okay.
I've seen some of the documents about the Coyote Canyon event and also an earlier one, or around that time, where one of your security officers saw a disc
right
out on the...
Actually, one of the security officers from Sandia Laboratories, they had their own security, was checking, it was driving around on a graveyard shift sometime after 2 o'clock in the morning, and saw a craft land at a bunker. But the bunker didn't have anything in it, but the craft landed. And when it landed, all the electronics in that vehicle shut off. His engine shut off, his portable radio stopped transmitting, his portable radio in the vehicle stopped. For as long as that craft was on the ground. When the craft took off, everything came back on. And so I investigated that. All we found was that something landed there.
Was it on base radar?
No radar. I checked it. The first thing I did was checked with FAA. And we had also at Kirtland, we had at that time it was pretty a secretive unit that scanned every single frequency that could possibly be generated in and around the base, radio frequencies. And so I went to them and I said, hey, did you guys pick up any strange frequencies on this particular time frame? Nope. I said, okay, I went to FAA, let me see your printouts for this night. Nothing. So then I thought, well, are these guys making this up or what? Well, then the security police inside Manzano, I interviewed them separately, and they told me the exact same story. So I thought, it just makes too much sense to be a fantasy or hoaxing. So we investigated, but we could never find anything regarding that craft. But shortly after that, Major Ernie Edwards, who was the commander of the 1608th Security Police Squadron, the security, Air Force security police that guarded Manzano, came to me and said, I got a phone call from a guy by the name of Paul Benowitz. He lives right outside the base. He lives in Fort Hills, which is a housing community just on the other side of the base perimeter. And he told me he's seen all sorts of strange lights around Manzano. So I said, oh, that's strange. And so I started checking into it, and we found out that Paul Benowitz owned a business right outside the main gate of Kirtland, Thunder Scientific Laboratories. They made humidity sensors for submarines. So he had a government contract, and he had a security clearance. So I went and paid him a visit, asked him about what he saw, and he started telling me all sorts of stories about what he saw and what he did and what he thinks they are. So we conducted an investigation just to make sure this guy wasn't a Russian spy. He wasn't, doing all these things. His house was literally just a few feet from the base perimeter. I mean, his backyard bucked right up to the base perimeter, and he had all this sophisticated. Now he was a physicist. He had all this sophisticated equipment on his patio, his upper bedroom patio, that was pointed towards the base, and that's what we were concerned about. So we conducted an investigation on him, not only us, but National Security Agency, because he actually tapped in, and this was classified at one time, I don't believe it is classified anymore. He was tapped in to a National Security Agency, an NSA project that was going on base, and which he shouldn't have been able to figure it out, but he did. Very smart guy. So we had to figure out how we're going to get him away from what he was doing. And so we started slowly convincing him, or not really convincing him, but just giving him the idea that this might be just UFOs, extraterrestrials. And he ran with that. And I know I had a lot of criticism about that. I fed him all this disinformation and I made him go crazy, but Paul thought a lot of this up on his own. I didn't have to. It wasn't very difficult for me to convince him what he was seeing. He just told me it's UFOs. Years later, I became friends with him. Years later, after I got out, he still owned it. I tried to explain to him that what he saw wasn't, but he would never believe me. He eventually went crazy and he died some years later. But some of what he was seeing was, he took pictures of strange-looking lights and orbs. And in fact, I sat, and not just me, Jerry Miller, who was he had been a Project Blue Book investigator some years before, and he was he was in the intelligence staff at Kirtland, not with OSI, but with another agency. Him and I sat in a room, probably not any bigger than this, with really tall ceilings. And Paul was sitting, and we just had dinner, and we came in, and we had some coffee, and the lights were down. In fact, none of the ceiling lights were on. We had just some table lights on. And we were talking. It was 8 or 9 o'clock at night in a winter night. And he says, he was explaining to us what he was seeing. And all of a sudden, we see this orb up in the corner of his room. And I looked at it and I watched it. Nobody else saw it at first. And I kind of elbowed. There was 3 of us there. It was me, Jerry, and another agent by the name of Steve Atzett. And I hit, and Jerry looked up and he said, and we didn't say anything to Paul. And then it started flying around the room, and then, of course, Paul saw it. He said, well, there it is. We looked around like, what the heck is this thing, you know? And so we watched it for maybe 20 seconds, and it disappeared. And went right back to that spot. Well, Jerry thought that it was created by Paul. And Jerry confronted him. He said, Paul, what did you just do? Paul said, no, I didn't do anything. He said, can I look and can I check things out? Yeah, go ahead. Well, Jerry's a scientist too. He looked all over, went up to his room, couldn't find anything that could have generated something like this. It was a ball of light with like little sparklers around it. And he says, that's the aliens. That's their reconnaissance. That's how they keep an eye on me. And a few weeks later, we were in his house without him being there. Now, a lot of people are saying we broke in, we surreptitious his entry. He gave me the key. Paul gave me the key, told me to keep my eye on, if you ever want to go in there, here's the key. So we didn't get any search warrants or anything, but we went in there and we saw a real small orb, not the same size we saw earlier, real small orb that burned a hole through his ceiling. Through his wall, from one room to another. And when we came back a couple of weeks later, we told him about it, and that burn hole was still there. Oh. So at first, we thought Paul was just hallucinating, you know. But the more I looked into this, there was something to this. He was actually photographing extraterrestrials. Not so much of a creature or but of their reconnaissance or their small orbs that they used to conduct experiments on humans. And he had I don't remember how many, but he had a whole group of pictures that I told him, the next time you take any pictures with he had a Canon 35 millimeter, one of those, well, at that time it was new. He had a Canon 35 millimeter, and I told him, I said, if you ever take any pictures of UFOs, don't develop them, let us do it. And he said, okay. So he calls me one day, he said, got a whole roll of 32 or 30, whatever many's in one of those rolls of photographs of these UFOs that I took over at the base. So I went out, picked them up, took them over to our secure photo lab, gave them to our secure developer and said, hey, develop these. And I stayed there, watched, wait. I said I wanted some 3x5s and 8x10s and whatever you can. So an hour later, however long it took, he comes out with them. He says, what the hell are these things? And they're oval-shaped crafts flying above planes that were landing at. Now, Kirtland Air Force Base shares a field with Albuquerque International Airport. So planes coming in, these things would fly right over top of them and then veer off.
Were these more like orbs, or were they structured?
No, they were structured. They were structured. And there were, I can't remember how many photographs there were, but they were structured crafts. And we had them blown up. I mean, the photo guys could do a lot. And we had them blown up. I mean, whereby these crafts were about as big as the Corona crafts. And they were exactly, oh, absolutely.
United States Army's Military Information Support Operations, or MISO, also known as Psychological Operations, or PSYOP, and their command structure, units, people, training, and missions. PSYOP units are assigned within the 1st Special Forces Command of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, or USASOC, which is the Army component of the U.S. Special Operations Command, or SOCOM. Although there has been some back and forth between the names PSYOP and MISO, the current understanding is that psychological operations refer to the name of units, while MISO refers to the function that all soldiers in PSYOP units perform. Although psychological operations are plural, the acronym PSYOP is always singular. There are 4 psychological operation groups. The 2nd and the 7th are in the Army Reserves, and the 4th and the 8th are located at Fort Bragg. Enlisted soldiers, both men and women, who want to join PSYOP must have at least 18 months but no more than 10 years of active federal service, a GT score of 107, passed a SEER physical within the past 24 months, have an APFT score of 240 or greater, and must be eligible for a secret security clearance. Officers who want to switch branches into PSYOP generally apply as first lieutenants or as junior captains. Those who meet minimum screening requirements are sent to a 10-day psychological operation assessment and selection. Selected soldiers then attend a 2-week PSYOP orientation course, 6 months of language training, an 8-week PSYOP core training course, 4 weeks of regional analysis and studies, and 4 weeks of interagency training. After passing a culmination training event, graduating soldiers are redesignated with the Military Occupational Specialty, or MOS, of 37 Foxtrot and officers 37 Alpha. All active duty PSYOP soldiers are airborne qualified. PSYOP soldiers conduct a broad range of political, military, economic, and ideological activities by developing, producing, and disseminating truthful information to foreign audiences in support of tactical through strategic national security objectives. Their missions include civil authorities information support, broadcasting, military information support operations, military deception, leaflet dropping, and aerial broadcasting, both television and radio. I have had the honor of working with PSYOP soldiers all throughout my career and have found that when they deliberately plan to persuade, change, and influence, they are hugely effective. Telling locals we are searching for a bad guy who lives in their village is an effective way to find someone on our kill-capture list without a fight. Helping locals share information about schools reopening or a NATO-sponsored building project is a great way to win hearts and minds. Okay, there you have it. A quick overview of Army psychological operations. Thanks for watching. Don't forget
is introducing an enhanced cybersecurity system called Gchq to better protect its vital public services from cyber threats. Under this new regime, all government departments and selected organizations will have their cybersecurity postures reviewed with annual, more robust audits. This is a part of a key cybersecurity strategy, and the Cabinet Office says it is committed to strengthening defenses against potential attacks. The NCSC's existing Cyber Assessment Framework, CAF, will review the security measures in place and include safeguards from cyber attacks. The new system is necessary following the emergence of a new threat by mercenary Russian hacktivists and should help improve the country's resilience.
If cyber warriors looked like this, we'd all understand the threat. But an invisible digital army can be every bit as deadly, capable of damaging the UK's national security. Taking on this unseen enemy is the job of the National Cyber Force, a joint partnership between Gchq and the Ministry of Defence. Personnel are drawn together under one unified command from intelligence, cyber, Gchq, the Ministry of Defence, MI6 and the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. Their job is to disrupt hostile state activities, terrorists and criminals threatening the UK's national security.
We are involved in cyber operations on a daily basis. That can range from against serious and organised crime and child sexual exploitation, right the way through to countering disinformation that might be coming from troll farms, which is trying to undermine the very fabric of our society, and then preparing ourselves for some of the worst case high-end threats. But we're operating in cyberspace constantly and persistently, because this isn't like a military capability that you keep in reserve. You have to be engaged forward all the time to understand and to be able to deter the threat.
Our dependence on cyberspace makes us vulnerable to criminals, terrorists, hostile states and corporations. They can damage the economy, national infrastructure, steal secrets and affect the democratic process. But these tactics can be used by us in an offensive way too, as they were against Islamic State in Syria and Iraq.
So offensive cyber is that ability to change those, to manipulate systems and data. And if you want a real-world example of how we have done this, I tend to refer back to what we did to counter Daesh in Mosul and the battles around Raqqa. And what we found there was that the Daesh, Islamic State, were exploiting cyberspace to recruit, to propagate a hateful ideology, to control their fighters, to exercise command and control, and to maintain their own morale. And that was a strength. It was a very novel way of executing a terrorist campaign. And we wanted to turn that strength into a weakness. So we began to attack their servers, to close them down in cyberspace, but also to disrupt their communications with their fighters and to fundamentally undermine their cohesion and their morale. And to do that in combination with physical maneuver in the air, in the ground, with Iraqi security forces, and the result you saw play out, which was very effective.
But cyberspace is a relatively new environment, and how we behave on offensive operations is still a topic for debate.
First completely artificially human-created domain, and it is not just a domain of military operations, it's an environment. It's what sustained us through the pandemic. It's what you and I are interacting over now. And offensive cyber involves exploiting the weaknesses of the internet for the purposes of your own national security, and that's absolutely necessary in certain circumstances. But it can't be completely detached from the need to secure the internet for our own purposes, so you and I can buy things safely, so we can exchange messages safely and so forth. And getting that posture absolutely right needs more debate. And I think one of the things we in the West, in the sort of rich, digitized, democratic rule of law countries need to be careful about is that on balance, in my view, others may disagree, but on balance, in my view, we have more to gain net from having a safer internet than we do by focusing mostly on exploiting the weaknesses of others. So it's about getting that balance right.
Cyberspace isn't just an issue for individual countries. Since 2016, NATO has officially recognised cyberspace as a domain of operations for the alliance, and one country is of particular concern.
It's become very apparent that Russia is attempting to subvert not only the operations of NATO in a military or organisational sense, but also the civilian infrastructures, including the electoral infrastructures in the members of the alliance itself. So I think it sees a very live, immediate and persistent cyber threat to NATO as an organisation and to its member states.
And as technology develops, that threat will only grow, meaning cyber is set to be an enduring feature in any future military conflict.
The National Cybersecurity Center published this article a couple of days ago about their website scanning program that has been operating in the UK. If you have web servers in the UK, maybe you've already got correspondence from them, or at the very least, you might have seen their IPs scanning your server in your system logs. Now, right away, they tell us why they're carrying out the scanning activities. They say that it's to make the UK the safest place to live and to do business online. They want to better understand the vulnerabilities that are out there being exploited, at least in the UK's cyberspace, and they want to better help business owners understand their security posture on a day-to-day basis. So essentially, they're trying to make sure that systems that are configured in the UK are secure, thus making the UK's internet as a whole more secure. It's like real-life internet policing, but I guess it's the good kind, where people are being made more aware of vulnerabilities on the websites that they have. I guess it's more like a neighborhood watch systems. And they also post advisories about how to patch 0 days. Like we can see this article that they posted here about the Apache Log4j vulnerabilities. Those were a big deal late last year. And they also tell us some software that's using it. Like we can see Apache Struts 2, Apache Solar, Apache Druid. So all these different softwares that are using it. I think there's actually a link to, they've got links to more information. They've got links to this GitHub, which I think is a list of software that's using Log4j. So that way you can go against that when you are auditing your system to see whether or not it's present in your software stack. And they also give us a way to mitigate the problem. So they tell us that we can just disable that Jindy lookup class in our class path. So this would have been really, really helpful last year. And they actually posted this, I believe, just one day, December 10th, one day after the Log4j vulnerability was publicly disclosed. So this is a pretty handy program for people that are building their own websites, especially if they are doing so independently. And what I mean by independent website building is there's some managed services that have become very popular in the past few years, like Shopify, Wix.
Well, since the dawn of time, when Og met Og, picked up a rock and told him to look over there before bashing him over the back of the head. Psychological warfare has been an integral part of the battlefield ever since. For thousands of years we've been perfecting and adding to the different sorts of tactics and strategies used by psychological warfare units over these few thousand years. In fact, some of the best tacticians and some of the best strategists, warfare strategists, such as to name a few, Alexander the Great, Rommel, General Montgomery, Hannibal, Julius Caesar, Sun Tzu. Some of these strategies have been around for thousands of years and not really changed very much. In fact, Sun Tzu is still taught quite a lot at military academies worldwide. It's that influential. Now, though some of the strategies haven't changed, the technology has, and it has evolved over time. A psychological advantage over your enemy is an incredible advantage. If you can convince the enemy that you're unbeatable, you will be unbeatable. If you can convince the enemy that you're going to be in one place and then you're not and you appear behind them, another advantage. Psychological operations therefore involve quite a lot of deception and deceptive tactics and misdirections and misinformation and disinformation and misdirects and obfuscations and you name it. Now, like I said, though the tactics may not have changed, the technology has, and therefore so has the battlefield, or the range of the battlefield, and also the enemy combatants. Gone are the days where it was just an enemy army that you would be using these psychological tactics on. Nowadays you use them against native populations that you've perhaps occupied, and even your own. One thing that needs to be addressed when talking about psychological operations is the role of psyops in certain alternative research fields. I've stated categorically a lot of times that this side of research, this movement, if you can call it that, was set up by the system for the system to breed narratives and to discredit other narratives for the system. One area where this is extremely prominent and apparent is the UFO field. There was, you can't discount the misinformation and disinformation policies of organisations like institutions, should I say, like the US Air Force or the British Air Force, or in fact any Air Force, in fact any military worldwide. We got quite a taste of this through a gentleman called Richard Doty, who was a Air Force intelligence officer during the 70s and 80s, and his interactions and his sort of friendship, but more of a placement, with a gentleman by the name of Paul Benowitz. Doty's job was basically to feed him narratives and disinformation, to see how far they'd spread and see how much they'd be believed. It's now estimated roughly, at the very least, 90% of what you see in the UFO field is wrong, disinformation. And we know this because of what Doty says.
One of the things that is quite disgusting, if you for the people who've ever been briefed in this program, is there's not much out there that's factual. The UFO community disinforms themselves. They provide, people go out there and write books, and without any facts, 90% of everybody that writes these books, these authors, had never been in the military, worked for the intelligence community, never had a security clearance, and they're just relying on second, third, and fourth-hand information to write a book, and then basically poison their readers and the rest of the UFO community. And so the July craft actually it crashed in the end of June. The recovery project was into July, because it was at the end of June, and people just didn't get it right, and the UFO community didn't get it right. Now there's some people out there that have tried to present the facts, but they've been ridiculed, and so their information is not being believed. But just like the Horst Mesa crash in '49, very few people have that factual. They think it was entirely different craft. The craft was exactly the same as the Corona craft, exactly the same. And the damages that they showed in this movie, they showed sketches of the crafts together at some location, and it appeared, if anybody with a logical mind can see, that these crafts crashed together. Why they crashed, I believe the Eben, they call it this particular entity that lived in Eben. He probably explained, but I was never briefed into exactly how he explained the two crafts crashed. I know it was a lightning storm. It was a storm in that time period when it was when they crashed. But the two crashes have been separated by some people and then discounted by others within the UFO community. And that's what is so disgusting and troubling within the UFO community. That's why I have nothing to do with them anymore. I've tried. I've went to UFO conventions and tried to explain what the truth is, and nobody wants to hear you because they've written a book that says it happened this way, and they're not going to listen to you, even though they really don't know the truth.
Right. Don't bother me with the facts my mind is made up.
Exactly.
I run into it all the time.
Yeah.
So did the craft, can you describe the actual craft more? Did they show enough of it to get any detail of the sense of the size?
It was about...
Now, of course, this also bleeds into cyber warfare, obviously, but also political warfare as well. I don't think these two sort of angles or aspects of psychological warfare are too well understood. Essentially, political warfare is waged through political parties inside a nation that are friendly to the nation that's doing the psychological warfare, or the psychological agency. Yeah? An example of this I showed last time with Red Cell. The Red Cell document that came out of the CIA that talks about how they bred apathy in particular nations when the Afghanistan war wasn't going so well, just so it could facilitate them rigging elections to get their men in. They'd also tabled two candidates that were both friendly to the CIA and to the regime and the agenda that they were portraying. But they also started tabling less and less suitable or reliable candidates to basically increase that apathy more and more and more, until eventually hardly anyone's voting and they can rig it as much as they want. And they've done this throughout France, Germany, Sweden, Britain. And this has been an ongoing thing for a long time. With that in mind, other sorts of avenues of deception and control began to evolve and open up. One of those being propaganda. Now, propaganda, bear in mind, isn't a new phenomenon. It's not been solely a development of the printed word, radio age, television age. It actually began far back in time. In fact, the Romans are a prime example when they would do the circuses. Yeah, you've heard the term bread and circus. This was to appease the people and also to sort of convey your ideas across to the population. Something that you want them to believe and something that you don't want them to believe, like this person over here or this civilization is really bad and this is what they do and this is what we'll do to them. All told in gory fashion, obviously, by the Roman gladiators. The same is true today. Like I said, the medium has changed, the tactics haven't. So nowadays, film, cinema, TV, printed word. In fact, the printed word more than people actually realise. It's a very powerful deceptive tool. Very powerful control tool as well. if any of you have seen my Monarch video, you'd understand what I mean. Edward Bernays was essentially you could call him the grandfather of modern propaganda techniques, and he developed most of them during World War One. He developed them basically to coax the American people into wanting to join in the war, in the First World War. So they had propaganda posters, they had showreels, they had all sorts going on, and he developed subtle, sort of subliminal sort of messaging and sort of the speech techniques used, actually sort of perfected by not just Hitler but Joseph Goebbels as well. In fact, Bernays famously said that he invented propaganda techniques, but Joseph Goebbels perfected them. Stalin being another master propagandist as well. In fact, the British, Russian and German and American sort of propagandist sort of or propaganda wings were expert and had countless different sorts of different techniques, different ways of combating each other's techniques, and this developed further techniques that sort of increase the subtlety and increase the detectability of these techniques being used. This aspect of it, of this, though, we will cover more in the mainstream media episode, which will be next. Same with the social media aspect. So we'll just sort of gloss over those at the moment, and we'll put them to one side. These psychological techniques became rather more apparent during the COVID pandemic, when the knowledge of psychological units, military psychological units like Psy-ber and a nudge unit became more widely known. Same with another Psy-ber warfare unit, and I say Psy-ber as in PSY-BER because they are both a psychological and cyber warfare unit, and that's the 77th Brigade. But they're not the only one. Everyone famously knows about the 77th Brigade, obviously, but there's also the 13 Signals that are in the UK, along with the NCSC, which is the the National Cyber Security Centre. There's also the NSC, which is the National Security Centre. That's in. These are all part of Gchq, by the way, in the UK, which is the government communications headquarters that was established in World War One, and then has sort of branched out over time. It's our version of the NSA, basically, in America. The US too has their own sort of rather famous now psychological units. One of them being the 4th Airborne Psychological Warfare Research Group, which is also assisted by the 2nd Airborne, both on either side of the country. And then you have the 7th and the 8th Psychological Warfare Groups, which are the reserves. Much like the 77th Brigade are in the UK, they're more of a civilian wing rather than an actual battlefield sort of unit, if you get what I mean. I call them reserve. They're like the territorial army. If you live in the UK, you'll know what I mean with the TA. Well, the 77th Brigade are actually made up primarily of reservists of territorial army, so they're civilian in nature. This is also why they are farmed out, shall we say. They're not mercenaries, although, to be fair, you could really class them as that, but they don't like to be called mercenaries because that's illegal in the UK for one of our military units to be a mercenary unit. So even though you see 77th Brigade working within Facebook and within YouTube and in tandem, shall we say, in partnership with the American NSA and their psychological wings, but also PRISM, which is the NSA's version of the 77th. There's also Pegasus as well, which is their version of the NSC. In the UK, this cyber warfare unit and the psychological warfare wings are also tied to the intelligence arm of the SAS in the UK, who were called E Squadron. They used to be called the Increment. I mentioned them briefly in the last episode, but I think they need a bit further discussion because of what they actually do. You see, a lot of these psychological and cyber sorts of warfare procedures and tactics came about during the Iraq War, which is also when the Increment, as they were then known, were set up. Now, to give you an idea of what I mean, it's now pretty well known that before any boots got on the ground in Iraq, E Squadron was already on the ground. When it was all kicking off in Syria, E Squadron was already on the ground, same in Libya. Very few people ask why, or even who E Squadron are. E Squadron are not considered a part of the UK Special Forces, yeah, or the UK military in any sort of way. They were previously known as the Increment, which is just basically an offshoot, but they're a paramilitary offshoot. That part is key, absolute key to what these people do and who they are. Because the paramilitary, they're not made up completely of UK Special Forces. They actually employ other sort of well, they basically take on local militia and stuff like that, yeah. When they talked about Gladio in the last episode and what they did and how they operated, yeah, it's pretty much the same deal with these, except they're far better trained, let's put it that way. Now, these units are used to develop and build a psychological sort of narrative over a chosen population, right? So let's take Syria as an example, yeah, because ISIS have been sort of prevalent in that area a lot, right? ISIS, like I said last time, are a fictional entity, never existed. And this is why. You basically begin terrorist actions, yeah? You take your squad, yeah, which will be the command structure for the terrorist organisation, yeah, or the organisation that you're wanting to fake, yeah? They go in, they select certain people, yeah, specifically for certain set of skills and stuff like that, yeah. You then get them to attack a target, right? That becomes a terrorist act, yeah. Follow me? These people come back and then they'll attack another target and another target and another target. None of these actions are done by an actual terrorist group. They're all done by one intelligence-led organisation. Yeah? These natives are essentially just mercenaries, right? That's all they are. You then begin to build a narrative around these mercenaries who are carrying out these terrorist acts, and you use that terrorist organisation as your bogeyman to control the rest of the population. This is why when you have places like Iraq where law and order has collapsed and everything else, yeah, the people are scared, they need someone to give them at least some sort of safety, some sort of security. They then look to the authority, which will be the actual Allied army forces that are there, right? They are then seen as combating this terrorist organisation that doesn't exist, never has, right? This is key. There's been several attempts at this over the years and over the decades. Yeah? The Mujahideen that they turned into Al-Qaeda basically in Afghanistan was one example of this. The Mujahideen were who the US got to fight the Russians in Afghanistan to drive them out. That was funded by Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden being not a lot of people know, but he was actually from an extremely wealthy family, oil tycoon sort of Saudi family, yeah. Also relates to the royal family in Saudi Arabia. Not a lot of people know that. But he was also employed by the CIA. And they used pretty much the same tactics, yeah, guerrilla tactics, to both baffle and demoralise the Russian forces that were there. And that's exactly the same tactics that they were using in Iraq, in Syria, and also in the West, for the same purpose, to affect and demoralise the native populations there, so they would then look towards authority to save them. Like I said, psychological. Everything these people do is part of a psychological game through deception. Now, once they've established ISIS inside Iraq and inside Syria and inside Libya, right? Then they can then spread it out to the rest of the world, using, again, a lot of the time, red cells to enact these terrorist attacks on behalf of ISIS, right? That is then blamed on ISIS. Again, the bogeyman, someone to focus their attention on and not onto them, and then they then look to authority to then rescue them from this terrorist threat. You begin to paint a picture, yeah? The Day X plot, like I said last time, was the only time when they've been caught out, right? When they've been actually discovered. And it's the last time that they haven't been sort of stuck like that again, yeah? Obviously these people messed up bad, yeah, by getting caught. Now, in order to keep this, to perpetuate this sort of narrative that they've now woven that involve ISIS in the Middle East, that have now spread out to the rest of the world and attacking the rest of the world, is to use the mainstream media to perpetuate that lie. But they have a direct tie to MI6 and to Gchq. In fact, they go off their orders more than they do the actual Special Air Service or the SAS in the UK. Functionally, they're completely different to our usual Special Forces units. like I said, they act more as a paramilitary force than they do an actual sort of military, official military force. The actual cyber warfare aspects, quite a lot of this we'll have to discuss in the big tech episode, which will be after the mainstream media episode. But we can sort of talk about their tactics, especially during the pandemic. They set up troll farms basically, or they would have one agent acting as several different profiles, trying to coerce people into thinking differently. Or if someone was not thinking in the way that they wanted to, as in against the vaccines, then they would persuade them in various different ways. This is extremely easy to do, extremely subtle, and it's very hard to detect as well when they do this in comment sections and on places like Twitter, Telegram, places like that. Telegram, they have to employ a different sort of tactic because of the way it's structured and the encrypted nature of it. They actually attack pages to discredit them. They flood them with anti-Semitic posts, anti-Islamic posts, anti-gay posts, but posts of extreme nature. Yeah, they will start arguments. They will pick a target, just one target, and then have several of their own operatives attacking that one target at once. It's called the damsel in distress method. It's not my words, that's theirs. Or they may just pick someone out and use them as a proxy to then befriend someone else on that page. I've seen this happen plenty of times on my Telegram page, a lot of times on my chat page, not on the actual Telegram channel itself. Though I have had one of their ops as one of my admins purely because I wanted to learn what she was doing and what they were doing and what tactics they were using. But you will see this a lot, all over. There's various different ways you can identify them. Like I said, there's the argument sort of thing. There's the lack of interest in any sort of contrary information that you would give them. Even someone who's having a binary with you, yeah. If you show them evidence, 90% of the time they'll look at it, yeah. These guys won't, and you can tell they won't because you'll give them a 50-page document and they'll reply back within 30 seconds saying they've read it, and then disregarding everything that's in it because obviously they're not read it. They're just following the narrative. You follow a character. You often find as well that the caricatures of certain types, certain political sort of leanings, or certain racial stereotypes and everything else, they're not really very in touch. I think is the best way to describe them when it comes to the characters that they portray. You'll find them very cartoonish. Like they're a Nazi, they'll be extremely Nazified, to the point where you're starting to think, is that Hitler? That cartoonish. Some of them are a bit more clued up and a bit more in touch with people out there, but the vast majority of the time they are like that. They're also right in a certain way. Believe it or not, misspellings or wrong grammar at particular points during a text conversation triggers people in different ways. So you can actually both either increase the anger in someone or infuriate them to develop a certain response, to make them look bad to someone else, or you can sort of you can dumb them down, you can make them copy, there's so many different things you can do. Text is probably, written text, a written word, is probably the least understood and least well-known aspect of the control grid. And it's something the psychological wings use a heck of a lot. Like I said, there's a rhythm and a flow that they'll use to elicit a certain response from you, or to sort of increase the likelihood that you'll trust them, or develop a certain feeling of empathy with them. Yeah, they're very skilled at that. And this works more than it does with film or audio, believe it or not. Strange, I know, but it's the way it is. I think it's by the simple fact that you are actually soaking that information in. Yeah, very intent on that information that's getting to you. Even on a subconscious level, you can still tell the sentiment of sort of behind what someone is saying to you. Yeah, even though people say, well, you don't always get the right emotion off text. You do on a subconscious level, believe it or not. This is something that I explored quite deeply when I was a ghostwriter. Believe it or not, when you're actually speaking in a sort of chat room environment, or in a text to a friend or a loved one, or just giving them a note or something like that, or telling a personal story even sometimes, your speech patterns actually are intrinsically linked, to the way that you write. Yeah, the way that you speak is exactly the same as the way that you write in those situations. So you'll have the same rhythm, you'll have the same flow, you'll have a particular lexicon that you use, a vernacular that you use that is personal to you and only you. The way you punctuate and grammatize your sentences, the way you structure them, all of this is highly personal to you. And this is something that can be mimicked. Yeah, it's also something that can give an idea of the emotion that's behind something. If you're accentuating each sort of sentence with either a comma again and again and again and again, or punctuating, yeah, everyone knows that as a rigid sort of accentuated statement, as in there's an intent behind it. They really mean that whatever it says. Yeah. The same can be said with, like I said, with commas and exclamation marks and question marks and blah 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 blah. Everyone knows grammar. Yeah. But it's the particular way it's used a lot of the time that sort of gives that away. And then there's the words that people use. Like I said, that lexicon and that vernacular is personal to you. This flow, like I said, can also be hijacked and manipulated, yeah, to draw you in a certain way. And they use this. A lot of these techniques were mostly dreamt up and implemented and tested during World War One, and then World War Two onwards. But they've become more widely used now than they were, say, in the 60s and 70s, because we had no internet then, or 80s. Yeah, it's become more widely used now because of this, because of the technology that is being used. So this is where these cyber warfare units come in, and these agents come in, especially the 77th Brigade. Their job is to basically police you and not sort of give themselves away, yeah, to do this in such a way, to steer you in such a way that you will not be able to tell that that's a government agent that's doing that, but also get the desired result. And it doesn't always work. Not these days, anyway. I showed you a document last time called Gchq, which was it's basically the handbook of the 77 Brigade, or the precursor to that anyway. And it came from a former program that the Gchq had called Golem, which I've also discussed last time. Unfortunately, there's a lot of this that we can't actually touch on because it ties in directly to the MSM and to Google and big tech. So it'll be the MSM next time that we'll touch on, and we'll touch on their techniques and what they use. Okay? Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. I'll see you later.